In this lesson, we'll continue looking at some of the painting tools that we can use in ZBrush. So apart from painting just materials and changing the materials on our object, we can also paint color, which is going to be a very powerful tool for us to use. Now this tool that we have loaded up is 07 Start Creature. If you want to open that up, or you're free to use any model that you have if you want to go through this example really quickly. I'm not going to use too many tools here. I just want to kind of show you how this works. So this particular model is about 2 million polygons. And so that's one thing, as we talked about in the last lesson, that if you want to create a fine poly paint with a large amount of detail, you're going to have a high resolution mesh. It's not like creating a 2D texture where we're working with a UV map and it's dependent on the resolution of the texture file. It's actually painting directly onto the polygons, and so we don't need to use UVs, which is a nice thing. We don't need to worry about that, but it is dependent on the resolution of the polygon, so that if we have something that is lower resolution, it's not going to work as well. So we have just a standard brush selected, and instead of choosing material, we'll choose RGB. We'll assume that we don't want to mess with the material right now. Okay, and we don't want to choose mRGB because that's going to paint not only whatever color we have selected, but it's also going to paint the material that we have selected. So we'll just choose, in this case, RGB. We don't want to sculpt, so we'll take Z add and Z sub off, and we won't worry about the Z intensity. We can change our brush size and focal shift if we want to. Okay, we can also change our RGB intensity. So now working with colors, we need to select the color that we want to actually add. So that's going to be right down here. You can see what our current color is, and down here we have a slot for main color and our secondary color. To actually sample colors, if we want to sample a color from our canvas, we can actually click and drag, and you can see how these colors are getting sampled as I'm holding down. So if I want to sample the blue from the eye, I can go ahead and do that and choose the eye color down here. Otherwise, we can just click to define a hue here, and then we can click our specific color that we want to add. Let's get maybe a green, and you can see that that's loading into our main color slot. Okay, so to actually now paint, we want to have a particular type of a stroke. In this case, let's choose a color spray, and what that will do is create subtle variations on this color within our spray pattern. So you can see as I spray that on, it's actually not all that specific color of green. It's actually, there's a little bit of variation in there. Okay, you can kind of see that. Now we can also integrate alphas into the mix. So if we want to grab one of these kind of splotchy alphas, that's going to make it just even a little bit better. So you can see here, as we're drawing that on, getting that variation is something that is, can be difficult to do, but you have a lot of built-in functionality here to be able to get that sort of variation. Okay, so you can do that and kind of bring that color in. And this color is again being added strictly to the polygons themselves. Now let's say if we maybe want to add kind of a lighter green color to this, well, we can kind of lighten this up, maybe add a little bit of yellow to it, take our draw size down, and then we can start coming in here and painting across. Okay, now notice that I'm painting on both sides, but one of the nice things about working in ZBrush is you can actually use symmetry to paint and sculpt as well. So if we go to transform, we can activate symmetry, and then we have the different axes that we can turn on. We have X turned on, so now anything I do over here is going to be mirrored over to the other side. So if I want to now get kind of a darker green coming in here, come back over the top here, you can see how I only have to do it on the one side, and it's actually mirrored over to the other side. Okay, so I can come in here and start to paint through this. Now if I darken this up a little bit too much, I can always sample that lighter green color and then come back in and paint over it. Okay, this is what's called poly painting, because we're painting on the polygon. So when you hear that term, that's just what we're talking about. We're not using UVs. We're not creating, at least yet, we're not creating a texture map. We're not painting a texture map. We can create texture maps from the poly painted data that we have on here, but for that we will need to have a UV layout and so forth, because you just need a flat layout to create a flat image like that. But poly painting will allow you to really quickly come in and start to paint your models and add color to them without having to worry about those UV. So we could come in here if we wanted to add maybe a little bit different color, maybe get kind of a dark red coming in here, and we can start to change our stroke. Okay, or maybe turn off our alpha there, take our stroke and take our focal shift down, and then you can get some kind of hard edged pieces here. Take our draw size way down if we wanted to get some different effects in there, some markings that you may want to add. Okay. Now we can also integrate the painting that we're doing. We can actually integrate that with the sculpting. So in this case, if we want to paint the same time as we want to sculpt, so for instance, we have some raised areas, and let's get maybe kind of maybe a brown color. And wherever we paint this brown color, we actually want it to be raised up. So to do that, we would combine our RGB and the RGB intensity with either Z add or Z sub. It'll take a little bit of experimentation, but here you can see wherever we add this brown, you can see that that is actually adding the color and sculpting at the same time. So if you have, scales or things like that where you're adding sculpted geometry, and everywhere that that is raised up you want it to be a specific color, this can be a really quick and easy way to do that. Okay, and you can actually combine the material, the color, and the sculpted information all within one stroke. So if I wanted to, for instance, have a reflective, something reflective on him, and I want to actually raise it off of the surface, then I could choose mRGB. I could choose let's choose a red color, or maybe a blue. We haven't done blue. So a really blue reflective piece that is raised off of the surface. You can see how we can do all of that within one stroke here. Okay, so it's really nice to be able to do that. Depending on the projects that you have, you can add material, you can add color, and you can add your sculpted detail all within one stroke. So that's kind of a rough overview of poly painting. Now, once you get into doing your poly paint, you'll eventually probably want a texture map. So in that case, you have options for creating UV maps. You have options for creating texture maps from the poly paint. Or if you have a texture map, in this case we have a texture map that is already made, you can actually bring that in. Change our material here. You can actually bring that in and create a poly paint from the texture map. So you can go back and forth, and it's a really powerful method, and we do have a number of courses on taking advantage of that technique. Okay, so I think now that we've covered poly painting real briefly, it should give you a good idea of kind of what that is, at least. The next thing that we want to do is let's take a look at transpose and kind of moving things around and posing objects using the action line and using transpose. So we will take a look at that in the next lesson.